July 29th, 1997. Fukui, a quiet city on the Sea of Japan coast. In a small apartment above the summer heat, a 49-year-old woman is getting ready for another ordinary evening. Her neighbors know her as a friendly regular at the local Auden bar. A woman who loves karaoke, pours drinks with both hands, and never talks about her past. She has been wanted for murder for almost 15 years. Her photograph is hung in every police station in Japan for so long that it no longer looks like her because the face in the photograph no longer exists. And in exactly 21 days under Japanese law, her crime will expire. She will have outrun time itself. Tonight, the longest woman hunt in Japanese history ends over a plate of Oden. Ahead lie a future baseball superstar who knew the fugitive only as the kind lady at the sweet shop, a wanted poster the police had to draw from imagination, and a pair of karaoke maracas that beat the clock with 3 weeks to spare. This is the story of the woman with 7 faces. The story begins 15 years earlier, in the humid August of 1982. In Matsuyama, a castle town on the island of Shikoku, Kazuko Fukuda was 34 years old, a hostess in the city's night district, a wife, and a mother of 4. Her life until then read like a long argument with fate. Her parents split when she was small. Her mother ran a brothel out of the family home. At 17, she went to prison for her part in a robbery. The night world was the only world that had ever had a place for her. The night district of a provincial city in 1982 ran on cash, credit, and performance. A hostess sold conversation by the bottle, kept a ledger of favors, and lived one bad month from real trouble. It was an economy of borrowed money and borrowed personas. And Fukuda, by every account, was fluent in both currencies long before she became famous for them. On the night of August 19, 1982, inside an apartment in Matsuyama, Fukuda strangled a 31-year-old colleague, a fellow hostess, and took her money and valuables. The court would later call it robbery and murder. Whatever happened between the 2 women in that room, only one of them walked out of it. What she did next set the pattern for everything that followed. She did not panic. She collected roughly 600,000 yen, packed a bag, kissed her children goodbye, and disappeared into the summer night. Her husband stayed behind and would later be convicted for helping conceal what she left in the apartment. Think about what she was leaving. 4 children, a husband, a hometown where everyone knew her name. From this night on, having a name at all was a luxury she could never afford again. The police expected to catch her within weeks. Fugitives run out of money, call their mothers, come home for funerals. The manual says they always come home. Kazuko Fukuda had read a different manual. Geography should have been on their side. Shikoku is an island, and in 1982 there was no bridge to the mainland. Leaving meant a ferry terminal or an airport, and every one of them could be watched. The police watched them. Somewhere in those first chaotic days, a woman with a Boston bag crossed the water anyway and stepped off the map. Japan in 1982 gave a murder investigation 15 years. That was the statute of limitations. If the state could not catch a killer within 15 years, the case died automatically, and the killer became legally untouchable. Somewhere on a night train, heading east, a 34-year-old woman began the longest countdown of her life. To survive 15 years, it is not enough to hide. You have to stop existing. Fukuda moved the way smoke moves. Osaka, Nagoya, the hot spring towns of the Hokuriku coast. She worked the jobs that ask no questions and file no papers. Hostess bars, small restaurants, the housekeeping corridors of love hotels, where staff are paid in cash and turnover is the business model. She collected names the way other people collect addresses. Hatsumi Takai, Shinobu Onodera. Each new city got a new woman, a new hairstyle, a new accent softened at the edges, a new harmless story about a divorce somewhere far away. The names were disposable. The discipline was permanent. Put yourself in her shoes for one day. Every form is a trap, a lease, a hospital visit, a pension record. Every friendship has an expiration date because friends ask questions. Every television in every restaurant might, at any moment, show your own face to the room. She lived like that for more than 5,000 days, and she went further than names. Again and again over the years, she paid cosmetic surgeons to move her hairline, her eyes, her jaw, quiet clinics, cash payments, a new stranger in the mirror each time. The press would later count the versions of her and give her a title: the woman with 7 faces. The police, meanwhile, were chasing a photograph of a woman who was being deleted, one operation at a time. Their file held the face of 1982. The face of 1985 was already someone else. The trail through Western Japan went quiet. The countdown kept running. Money was the quiet engine of it all. She was reportedly skilled at attaching herself to men with businesses and savings. A proprietor here, a shopkeeper there. Men who asked few questions and paid for new beginnings. Affection for her was also infrastructure. Then, in a small town in Ishikawa Prefecture, the fugitive did the most dangerous thing a fugitive can do. She built a life worth keeping. The town was Nigari, on the Ishikawa coast. The business was a traditional sweet shop. Wagashi, tea, seasonal confections wrapped in paper. Fukuda arrived as a worker and became, in time, the woman of the house. The owner took her in, and the neighborhood came to treat her as his second wife. She kept the books. She served the customers. She belonged. The life was real. And that was the genius of it. Snow country winters, morning deliveries, festival sweets in October, New Year orders stacked to the ceiling. She worked hard, and the town rewarded her the way small towns do, with trust. The safest hiding place she ever found was not a false name. It was other people's respectability, worn like a coat. Neighbors remembered her as graceful and unfailingly kind. The sort of woman a small town is glad to have behind the counter. None of them had any reason to imagine that the hands wrapping their sweets were the most wanted hands in Japan. Among the customers was a local schoolboy with a baseball glove, a boy named Hideki Matsui, who would grow up to become one of the most famous baseball players Japan has ever produced. Years later, as a superstar, he reportedly remembered the shop and the gentle lady who worked there. To him, she had simply been a beautiful, kind woman from the neighborhood. Even a future national hero looked directly at her and saw no one at all. This is the paradox of the perfect disguise. The deeper the new life goes, the more there is to lose. A wanted woman with a suitcase can vanish in an hour. A wanted woman with a shop, a partner, a reputation. She has given fate a hostage, and fate, in her case, had a badge. Back in Matsuyama, the detectives who had inherited the case refused to let it die quietly. The file was old. The face was useless. The clock was winning. So the hunters decided to do something Japanese police had never done before. In the 1990s, the hunt for Kazuko Fukuda stopped being a manhunt and became an experiment. The question was no longer where she was. It was what she looked like. The police put a price on her: 1 million yen. Today, that sounds routine. In modern Japanese police history, it was unprecedented. The first time the state had ever offered a public reward for a fugitive. They printed her face on telephone cards and scattered them across the country. They even released recordings of her voice, betting that surgery can change a face but not a laugh. And because her real face no longer existed, the police did something almost artistic. Working with surgeons and sketch artists, they published guesses. The same woman aged forward, slimmed, widened, lifted, her features adjusted for every operation she might have bought. Japan's most wanted poster became a gallery of hypothetical women. Somewhere in the country, one of them was pouring tea. The campaign changed the psychology of the chase. 15 million households now owned a piece of the hunt. Every regular customer, every neighbor, every taxi driver was a potential informant. For a woman whose entire survival strategy was being unremarkable, the country itself was becoming one enormous pair of eyes. The tips came in by the thousands. Women who resembled one of the 7 faces were reported by neighbors, co-worker, ex-husbands. Innocent lookalikes across Japan had their quiet lives interrupted by polite detectives with old photographs. In Matsuyama, the case squad itself was aging. Officers who had started the hunt as young men were briefing successors who had been in elementary school when the countdown began. It worked, almost. Tips flooded in. Sightings were chased down in a dozen prefectures. More than once, the net closed on the right town with the wrong timing, and the woman with 7 faces was already gone. One name lighter, one face newer. The old detectives began to admit the unthinkable out loud. She might actually make it. One near miss became legend among the detectives. A tip placed her in a hot spring town. Officers arrived within days. The trail was warm, a room recently vacated. A name that dissolved on inspection. Neighbors describing a polite woman who had left without goodbyes. They were chasing a person who treated departure as a professional skill. By the summer of 1997, the arithmetic was brutal. The murder was 15 years old that August. The statute of limitations would expire on August 19th. After 5,400 days of running, Kazuko Fukuda was 1 month from winning. In July 1997, with weeks left on the clock, national television gave the case one last push. A special program aired the whole story. The murder in Matsuyama, the 15-year chase, the 7 faces, the voice recordings, the countdown to expiry. It was watched in living rooms, in izakaya, in small restaurants across the country. In Fukui, it was watched by the regulars of a little Odin bar, who looked at the screen and then looked at each other. There was a woman who drank at that bar. Friendly, generous, a little theatrical. She loved karaoke, and when she sang, she liked to shake a pair of maracas. The mannerisms matched. The voice matched. The regulars could not unsee it. Word reached the bar's owner, and the owner made a decision that would end the longest fugitive run in Japanese history. The owner quietly handed the police a beer bottle the woman had held, a glass she had drunk from, and the maracas she had shaken on karaoke nights. Surgery had rebuilt her face. It could not rebuild her fingertips. The prints on the maracas matched a set taken from a hostess, arrested decades earlier in Shikoku. After 7 faces and countless names, Kazuko Fukuda had been identified by the one part of herself she could never replace. The comparison happened quietly, in a fingerprint lab far from the Odin bar. On one side of the bench, prints lifted from a beer bottle and a pair of maracas in Fukui, 1997. On the other, a yellowed card from a Shikoku arrest record, inked decades earlier. Ridge by ridge, whirl by whirl, the 2 women on the bench became one woman. 15 years of surgery, and she had never once thought about her hands. On July 29, 1997, officers stopped her in Fukui. She had been running for 5,459 days, 14 years and 11 months. The statute of limitations was 21 days away. 3 more weeks of silence and the law could never have touched her again. In custody, the last face finally gave up the first one. She admitted who she was, and the name Kazuko Fukuda, a name no one had spoken to her in 15 years, became hers again, in an interrogation room in Fukui. The countdown stopped at 21. The trial put 15 years of ghosts in one room. In 1999, the Matsuyama District Court sentenced her to life in prison for robbery and murder. She appealed, arguing over what had truly happened in that apartment in 1982. The Takamatsu High Court rejected the appeal in 2000. And in November 2003, the Supreme Court made the sentence final. The woman who had almost outrun the law would now spend the rest of her life inside it. The trial had a problem no court had faced before. Which of her the witnesses had actually known? People who testified about the sweet shop had never met the Matsuyama hostess. People who knew the hostess did not recognize the defendant. The court was sentencing one woman, and the gallery kept seeing 7. In the end, the law solved it the way the lab had. Not by the face, but by the record. The rest of her life was startlingly short. In February 2005, she collapsed during factory work in prison. On March 10, 2005, Kazuko Fukuda died of a stroke in a hospital in Wakayama. She was 57. She had spent 15 years running and fewer than 8 years caught. Japan never quite let go of her story. Her run inspired a critically acclaimed feature film titled simply Face, about a woman who flees a killing and keeps remaking herself across the country. The fascination was never really about the crime. It was about the question underneath it, how completely a person can become someone else. And what, if anything, refuses to change? There is one more ending worth knowing. In 2010, Japan abolished the statute of limitations for murder entirely. The clock that Kazuko Fukuda chased for 5,459 days no longer exists. She was one of the last people in Japanese history who could have beaten it, and she missed by 21 days. The Odin bar in Fukui went back to its regulars. The sweet shop in Ishikawa changed hands with the years. Somewhere in Japan, there are still people who knew her as Hatsumi, as Shinobu, as the kind lady behind the counter, and who learned her real name from the evening news. Kazuko Fukuda spent 15 years proving that a face can be rewritten, a name can be discarded, and a past can be outrun, almost. In the end, she was caught not by her face, but by her hands. Not by a detective, but by a song. The clock stopped 21 days early. It never started again.